Just walk right past me.
16?
No, they didn't tell you my name.
Lucy's betrayal.
I killed her, you know. I killed Lucy.
It was the apple, son. It was Juno.
I saw what she was. What would happen if I let her live?
When Assassin's Creed Brotherhood ended with Desmond being manipulated into assassinating Lucy Stillman, his closest ally up to that point, everybody thought it would be addressed extensively in the next game. Well, that game was Revelations, and the base game had minimal references to Lucy, other than how guilty Desmond felt about her death. Was she a triple agent or not? According to the DLC for Revelations, she was, and that's why Juno had to force Desmond to get rid of her. We appreciate that Kristen Bell wasn't going to be returning at this point, but the death of a main character like this absolutely should have had more time committed to it. And you shouldn't have had to buy a DLC for the sequel to find out what really happened.
Why they left you alone for so many years.
Modern Templars.
But the test of your true worth has barely begun.
The Templars just haven't been doing much for quite a few games now. Though they are still a major force in Black Flag and Rogue, by the time we got to Unity, the nameless modern-day character was so insignificant that you forgot just how dangerous Abstergo really is. And the problem has only gotten worse in subsequent games. Sure, Layla initially works for Abstergo and then betrays them, but what are the Templars doing? Do they have a new grand plan after Desmond thwarted the last one? Why has Ubisoft apparently forgotten all about this main villainous faction in favor of bringing back more Isu? Hopefully, we get an answer about all of this very soon.
And you will be on the front lines.
Callum Lynch.
You're here to save my soul. Something like that.
Perhaps Callum Lynch is better off forgotten, considering how poorly received the 2016 Assassin's Creed movie was. But the fact remains that the movie was slated to kickstart a trilogy, and the 2 sequels were cancelled when it catastrophically bombed. Callum's story has never been properly wrapped up though. He's very briefly mentioned in Origins, which makes sense because that game was still in development when the movie was coming out, and then disappeared completely after minor appearances in 2 comics. Ubisoft never saw the need to maybe write Callum as a character into the games to conclude his story, so we've lost track of him completely. Precursor boxes.
I'm just finishing old business.
This weird box is what drives most of the conflict in Assassin's Creed Rogue, with Shay defecting from the Assassins after they tried to activate one underneath Lisbon. But the boxes themselves are never really dwelled on. They're supposed to be data storage devices containing vast amounts of Isu knowledge, but nobody else ever tries to go after them. It's true that the Templars warned the Assassins at the end of Rogue to stay away from the boxes, but even in the modern era where they could be contained and supplied with enough power, nobody's ever gone after them and tried to use them since. You'd be forgiven for forgetting these crucial relics exist at all. Unity's fake games.
In this episode of Fallen Heroes, experience Jacques de Molay's final tragic hours.
Leaning into the Abstergo entertainment angle entirely, Unity opened with a selection of past Abstergo games, letting you choose only the tragedy of Jacques de Molay from among 12 of them. While most were versions of existing Assassin's Creed games in the real world, following the likes of Ezio, Edward, and Connor, there were 2 at the end, Jazz Age Junkies and Hell in Hibernia. Presumably, one would be set in the US during Prohibition, and the other would be set in Ireland during the Irish War of Independence. But we've seen little to nothing of these fascinating settings in the years since Unity. Fans would love a mainline game set in the 20th century, and Ubisoft certainly made a mistake by tempting people with them. The Crystal Skull.
This is bloody witchcraft.
No, this is Mr. Jack Rackham, somewhere in the world at this moment.
Similar to the precursor boxes, the Crystal Skull has also fallen by the wayside since Black Flag. While it was a little silly that the Isu would have made a crystal skull like that in the first place, the skull was an extremely powerful piece of Eden capable of locating anybody using just a sample of their blood. It's what everybody in Black Flag wants, chasing down the skull and the observatory in which to use it. At least 3 have been found, and they're supposedly used by Abstergo in the modern day. But you'd only know that if you played the 2010 Project Legacy Facebook game or diligently read the emails in Assassin's Creed 1, which came out 6 years before the skulls actually became important. It's absurd that everybody completely lost interest in the skulls after Edward.
With the device returned, I believe so.
The Nazca Lines.
You should know better than to question me.
In the first 2 games, Eagle Vision can reveal various glyphs and messages. Desmond sees them at the very end of the first game, strange symbols written on the wall by Subject 16 to warn him. There are many symbols, including hieroglyphs and doodles of pyramids, but also some of the Nazca Lines glyphs. Why Clay would choose to draw the Nazca Lines is anyone's guess, and Ubisoft, of course, never explains. Does it mean that the lines were actually created by the Isu? Do they mark something important? Considering we've never had a game set in Peru that explores this, we still don't know. Most likely is that it's just creative set dressing from Ubisoft, but it still raises many questions. Eve. Particularly in the Ezio trilogy, frequent mention is made of Eve, the first woman. We see her and Adam lead the human rebellion in Assassin's Creed 2's flashback, but Subject 16 also references her repeatedly as though she's the answer to all their questions. Somebody clearly forgot this along the way, however, because we still don't know why Eve was so important, aside from leading the humans in the war. Subject 16 himself is supposedly one of her ancestors, which is how he got that video to show Desmond. But since Clay completely disappeared from the continuity in Revelations, we may never get an answer about who else was descended from her.
Just walk right past me. 16? No, they didn't tell you my name.
Jesus. The early games regularly used religious imagery, from Altair encountering the biblical Ark of the Covenant to Ezio going tomb raiding underneath various important cathedrals. It looked like Ubisoft wanted to lift the lid on the truth about Christianity. But they must have gotten bored, because after Ezio, this stopped mattering. Though there were many hints about Jesus himself potentially being a human Isu hybrid or using pieces of Eden to perform his miracles, Ubisoft never completely explained all this, and what it did explain, it explained through cryptic puzzles. A game about the life of Christ would be fascinating, but we're not sure they'd be brave enough to actually do it. Juno.
If 100 minds could wish away a wall or create a tree, what might 1,000 do? 10,000.
She's reappeared in recent games to an extent, showing up briefly in Odyssey's Fate of Atlantis DLC and then in Valhalla. But what happened to Juno, who was set up to be the real main villain of the franchise? Well, unless you read the Uprising comic book series, you'd have absolutely no idea, because she was killed off and swiftly forgotten about. Uprising might be a good comic run, but the fact remains that Ubisoft absolutely should not have killed its main antagonist in a comic book that plenty of people wouldn't have even known about. And they also made the mistake of not replacing Juno with another villain, leaving the games floundering until the addition of Basim.
A sentence would be uttered. Make us safe.
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.